Good morning, Emily.
Good morning, Dr. Dan.
Ah, yes, that is a thing now, isn't it? Also, one of us is going to have to change. I guess it's going to be me, isn't it? Okay, then. Anyway, what are we talking about today before I go and change?
What research in financial planning looks like, what you researched for your dissertation, and what's next in the world of research for Dan.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it.
All right, so tell me a little bit more about what research in the financial planning world entails. What do financial planning researchers research?
The sort of impetus for a lot of this is that financial planning research is a fairly new thing. We're about 20 years out from the foundation of the first doctoral financial planning research program. So, a lot of financial planning research, what we would call financial planning research, has been done through the lens of consumer sciences, family and household research, or economics, or sociology, or like just plain old traditional finance. So, what a lot of financial planning researchers look at today tends to revolve around sort of the intersection between like objective financial health, right? Like having money, more income than your expenses, having a portfolio, having insurance, all of that, and tends to sort of look a lot at the intersection between good financial placement and like behavior. How do people feel? How do they react? How are they making their decisions? Because fields like finance and economics and whatnot have given us a lot of good normative best practices in how to actually manage money or handle risk or that sort of thing. And so financial planning really takes the sort of personal elements of how people interact with money and spends quite a bit of time asking, like, what is it that people are doing? Why are people doing what they do with their money?
Oh, that sounds like something that's kind of difficult to measure and actually study. Is that part of the reason there isn't very much original research?
No, not so much. I mean, it is. To be very clear, it is difficult. Many fields have these really old, really robust data sets, like these longitudinal studies that have been done for decades with really big, several thousand person cohorts. And we use some of those data sets. So if you have like the NLSY or the SEF or various sort of sources like that. And these data sets, ask lots of questions, right? Like, what is your income? What are your assets? But also things like how is your health, or how big is your family? How educated are you? And so a lot of that sort of data has been used to do a lot of financial planning research. But at the same time, those questionnaires, when they were created, originally going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years, a lot of them had no notion of the idea of working with a financial planner. So even today, a lot of data sets like the Survey of Consumer Finances ask questions like, do you work with a stockbroker? Do you work with a banker? Do you work with an insurance agent? And they asked it that way because when they started it decades ago, those were the jobs that existed. And so today, there's not even a clean proxy to a data set like that for, do you work with a financial planner or a CFP professional or something like that? We're now starting to develop our own data sets. The CFP board just started in the last couple of years. It's the beginning of a longitudinal research cohort to really assess the efficacy of financial planning and what financial planners do for their clients, but it's going to take literally years and decades for us to get really good data out of that. The other piece then is that it's just a very new profession, financial planning. It's just a little over 50 years old at this point. And on the other side of that, that also then means that the academic research is playing a lot of catch up with what people actually do in the financial planning world.
Did you run into a lot of problems with that with yours then? Is people not understanding necessarily what it is you do when you're asking questions and trying to collect data?
Yeah, I mean, like I've run into that issue personally. There was a question in my dissertation where we asked, like, have you worked with a financial professional and gotten advice? And we sort of thought that people would implicitly understand that that meant like, have you worked with a CFP or financial advisor? And then like 92% of the respondents said yes, and we're like, oh, like they're thinking like I've asked anybody about finance ever who does anything with money, and that counts. Like my cousin who sells life insurance is just as good as like a full CFP in the context. Like it's tricky because even something like recognition of the CFP marks is very good in the high affluence, high net worth marketplace, but even in the general public, unprompted recognition is not perfect. We're very far away from like a CPA recognition or doctor recognition or something like that.
Certainly. Yeah. Well, is there a lot of good research out there then? There must be. What's some of the best that you've seen?
Well, I mean, there's some really cool research. I mentioned the longitudinal study being done by the CFP board. There's not been so much in the way of findings from that, so much as just original, like, here's what we found in the original iteration of this, and then as time goes on, we'll be able to see how things change. But I mean, I think there's been some really cool stuff. We've seen stuff on gender and racial pay gaps. We've seen stuff on diversity in financial planners. So, like a research study done a couple of years ago looked at sort of racial animosity state by state, region by region, and the prevalence of white versus non-white financial planners. And you'd be unsurprised to find out that in states with higher degrees of racial animosity, there's less diversity in financial planning. There's been really cool research on who does crypto investing and why are they doing it? Are they doing it for financial returns? Are they doing it as a gambling behavior? There's been really cool stuff on the financial efficacy of people based on their educational focus, right? So what majors outside of finance do the best and worst with financial literacy and displaying financial knowledge? There's a lot of stuff on financial stress, on financial relationship dynamics, plenty of great financial psychology research that's led to things like the certified financial therapist certification. So there's a lot of really, really cool stuff being done. And that's kind of what's exciting about it. It's sort of like being a physicist in like 1800. There's so little that has been done that it's sort of the world is your oyster when it comes to research and the questions you can ask and what you can learn.
Yeah, that is very exciting sounding. I learned a little bit of that in that class you taught at CU, actually. You talked about the racial piece a little bit, but we didn't go as in depth as the crypto stuff.
No, well, and God, that class does not even remotely have the time to really get into that stuff. But I mean, like here's a really good example, just to talk about what you learned in that class. There is a prevalent or prominent business model in the financial planning world, which is essentially being paid a percentage of an investment portfolio for your services. And services might be anything from just managing the portfolio to super duper ultra comprehensive financial planning and advice, and paying your bills and managing your finances directly and all sorts of things. Like it's a huge range. But that has an interesting racial disparity effect, which is that just when you look at racial populations, just Caucasian, Latino, Hispanic, Black, Asian, so on and so forth, white households just by the numbers have the most financial affluence in both the mean and median measurements. And so, if your primary business model in a profession is to charge a percentage of liquid assets, you're going to see overrepresentation of people with liquid assets and underrepresentation of populations with less on average or in median liquid assets. So you see that in financial planning practices, kind of other than those that really do genuinely like target different racial groups or minority populations, you tend to see that the vast majority of clients of financial planning practices are Caucasian couples or individuals, and almost every planning firm will have some diversity in its client roster, but it's not even remotely proportional to the population at large in most cases.
Hmm. Yeah, I do remember that very serious lecture in that class about all that.
I'm sure it was the most fun thing you learned.
I mean, it was a fun class overall. Like retirement planning, who doesn't want to do that every week?
I mean, I sure do.
You certainly do. And on that note, tell me a little bit more about your research then. What did you do for your dissertation?
So my dissertation was called "The Economics of Information in the Search for Financial Planners," and what I was trying to dig at was a problem, and I'll sort of just describe the debate that financial planners have about it because I think it's very telling. There's a basic argument that happens between financial planners that goes something like this. Argument number one, you should put your price and your services on your website. Like you should have a pricing page and you should have like a diagram that explains all your services and what your pricing model provides. Maybe you have like a low tier, medium tier, and a high tier pricing model or something like that. You should put that on your website. You should scream that from the rooftops because then if you do that, the people who can afford it and want it will know about it and they'll find it and they'll hire you because they know what it is and they won't be surprised or shocked. And you'll also then sort of eliminate people who come to you and were like, oh, I would like to hire you, but you charge more than I can afford. I guess I'm not going to hire you. That's one argument. The counter argument goes something like this. Most people who consume financial planning services have never consumed them before. So when they go to hire a financial planner, it's probably the first time they're hiring a financial planner, or if, at most maybe the second time they're hiring a financial planner. And in that case, they don't have a lot of information to make informed decisions with. And that's a problem because not all financial planners do the same thing, offer the same services, have the same service model, et cetera. And when you put something out there, a clear signal like just price or just your suite of services, you're creating a point of friction, which is that some people who look at what you do or what your price is or what your service list is may not actually really understand that model or understand those services. They might make assumptions out of ignorance or misunderstanding. And consequently, then you might be losing an opportunity to educate somebody on what it is you can do for them and help them ascertain factually whether you are or are not a good fit for them. So the argument goes one way, you should put your pricing and your services out there. The other one says you shouldn't because people are going to misunderstand. My personal favorite analogy on this is if I say, I'm going to sell you a car for $40,000. The first question you should be asking me, of course, is what car, right? Because $40,000 might be a ripoff or a great deal. Just depends on what car. And so that's sort of the crux of the argument or the issue that I was trying to research in my dissertation.
Okay. That's interesting, actually. How do you go about researching something like that then, especially when it's something that most people haven't done before and don't have a lot of background information about?
Functionally, you create an experiment. So I went and with the help of my wife, who's a software developer, Caitlin, you're a wonderful, amazing person. Thank you. It wouldn't have been possible without you. Uh, with the help of a software developer, creating essentially an original survey software. And survey software itself is not the fancy part here. Like we could have used a Qualtrics or a Survey Monkey or any sort of thing like that to do the questionnaire part of it. But we had an experiment where essentially people were assigned to one of three groups. It was a group that had perfect information in the context of our experiment. Perfect information meant they could see pricing and services transparently. And then there were two other groups, one that could only see pricing information and one that could only see services information. And we wanted to tease out the differences in how those different groups were going to go about selecting their financial planner.
Okay. How many people did you survey for this?
Technically, 100 or not 100, excuse me, 1,008. However, what we found is that when you are not able to do your research on a vetted platform, so like if you use a Qualtrics or you use a Survey Monkey, you can pay those companies to bring you people to take your survey or do your study, who have been vetted and validated and identified. It's like they're real people. We know they're real people. We know who they are, like that sort of information on the side of the provider. And that helps you avoid issues of people just like bullshitting your study or lying on it, because they would get kicked out of those programs, wouldn't be allowed to participate. But because we had original software, though we originally had some commitments from some providers of what we call panel data providers, they essentially all sort of backed off because what they really wanted was, hey, like, why don't you just build your experiment on our platform, not recognizing or understanding that our experiment couldn't exist on their platforms. And so the challenge with that then became that we had to go to a platform, Mechanical Turk or MTurk, which is a Amazon product, essentially that gets you like literal swarms of people. Like it's incredible how many people do MTurk stuff, but it gets you a huge number of people very, very quickly who will do a task for you. And a very common task is take a survey or participate in a study or something like that. And so we were able to get a lot of people for that. But what we found in the process of doing that is even though we set these really high filters, so we required that the people who took it had what was called like master worker status, meaning they'd done like 1,000 tasks before, and also that then people in the group also had to have at least been approved for payment for 95% at least of the tasks they'd done. So if you're not getting paid, you're obviously doing something wrong, or you're fudging it or something like that. So then clearly you're not a very good worker, and we don't want you in our study. So even though we set those two pretty challenging bars for them to clear, about 60% of those 1,008 responses we got essentially were fake or fraudulent in some way, shape, or form. So like there were people who clearly had like 20 or 30 MTurk worker profiles and were like using software to like mirror themselves or spoof themselves in a way where essentially like some human being was taking the study or doing the survey, but as they did it, they were then like being copied across. So we'd look at our data set and we would see somebody with a profile like 33 years old, Hispanic male, has a master's degree, earns $35,000 a year, has $17 in their bank account. And then they would answer all the financial literacy questions and so on exactly the same. You'd be like, okay, hold on a second here. Like, there's no way that I have 20 people who all took this survey at like 8:07 a.m. and completed the survey at like 8:11 a.m. at the exact same time, who are the exact same age, have the exact same income, the exact same wealth, who answered the financial literacy questionnaire exactly the same, right? Who are identical in every single possible way, except for the fact that they are now submitting 20 different completion codes to get paid. So there was stuff like that that we had to pull out of it. What we ended up with then was essentially 401 people who were actually like real verifiable people. And then in that group, we also bifurcated that into a subgroup, which ended up being 156 people. And those were people with at least $50,000 in assets. And it was just helpful to create that separation because that at least is a little bit more likely as a profile for somebody who's going to work with a financial planner. Whereas some people in that full 401 set, were essentially reporting like, I have no income, I have no assets. And that's not really the type of person who's going to work with a financial planner. Although maybe they should if they can find a way to get a pro bono.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, tell me a little bit more about the results then. What did you find after you took all these, had everyone take all these surveys?
The interesting thing is sort of the lack of significance, and when I say that, I mean in the statistical sense. What we didn't find was much evidence of almost anything. I think there's first and foremost before I describe the results here, I don't think there's anything that I found in my dissertation that I would pick up and display to the universe and say, like, this is phenomenal research and we've proven this. There's nothing even close to that. There's nothing that I will ever say. So if I say anything with any degree of confidence or certainty as I tell you about the results here, you should just take that with a heaping fistful of salt. I don't think there's anything here that's generalizable or normative. I think it's insightful, but not necessarily something that I would say is useful for an actual form of results. So with that big disclaimer in place, essentially, we didn't find almost any significant results in terms of what we were expecting. We didn't find that people who had perfect information got better pricing. We didn't find that people who were doing a lot of search were ultimately actually doing much search at all. In fact, most of our respondents picked the very first planner they were presented with, or the second one that they were presented with. And even in the full group of people, who included people who may not be really good financial planning clients, and only the people who would be good financial planning clients, we even restricting those groups down didn't find much distinction between them. People with a little bit more money picked even faster than the people who had less money, at least as far as what they reported there. We found some sort of predictable things. We found that age was a little bit of a proxy for willingness to pay a little bit more as a proportion of income, but we also found that high financial literacy was a negative influencing factor on willingness to pay a portion of income or willingness to pay as a percentage of assets. What we also found is that no particular service. So we had a list of 16 services, things like retirement planning, tax planning, investments, so on and so forth, that really no service was specifically selected for. Like, there wasn't this overwhelming preference for planners offering tax planning, retirement planning, investment planning, or something like that. The selection really was pretty nominal. And if there's anything that really stands out in the study, it's that people made their decision really fast. And this is where I get back to sort of not wanting to make normative statements or generalizations. It's possible that people were just picking really fast because they just wanted to get through the study and get paid. Like, it's just possible that people are like, cool, I don't get paid to do a good job. I get paid to do the job. And the faster I do the job, the faster I can move on to something else. And so it's possible that people in the study, were really just being like, oh, yep, one planner looks good to me, done. Or one or two planners, okay, I get what they're trying to do here, whatever, I'm picking one, I'm done. It's that, and that's still a little bit illuminating. But what that hints at, if there's any reality to that, if that maps onto reality at all, what that really hints at is what we would call satisficing behavior, which is essentially the observation that people can do just fine by getting enough information to make a decision, not all the possible information necessary to make a decision, and that there'll probably be some version of okay, or they'll do just about as well with enough information instead of perfect information.
Some of that is very surprising to me. Do you feel like the results that you found or received where it was like, hey, people just kind of pick the first or second one? Have you seen that to be true in your practice?
Yeah, it's interesting. The vast majority of people we talk to in our practice are not talking to another financial planner. Like, they've Googled us. We were the top result for CFP Longmont or something like that, and they've come to us now, and they are now our client. or they now want to become our client, and they either do or don't become our client. But what they don't tend to do is come in very often and say like, well, you're the seventh CFP I'm interviewing, and I'm talking to everybody within a 30-mile radius, and I'm going to find the best possible one for me. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do that, but it is time intensive to research a financial planner. Like one of the big differences we in the dissertation we use what's called a vignette methodology, where we're just providing you with sort of a hypothetical set of facts and data to make your decision that maps somewhat onto reality. But the reality is like just looking at a set of data and clicking like, yep, that one is very different than the process of actually picking a financial planner. Picking a financial planner often involves Googling, searching, talking to friends, family, getting recommendations or referrals, and then you have maybe one or two you're thinking about, and then you want to schedule a meeting with them. You're probably meeting in person in a lot of cases, or if you're not, you're meeting on Zoom. But either way, you're going to spend 30 minutes to an hour with this person or with these people. They're going to ask you a bunch of really personal questions, and then all of this kind of echoes back into a problem consumers have. It's one of the kind of core items in my dissertation, is that financial planners are what we call credence claim providers. And credence claim providers essentially are like mechanics or doctors, where we promise we can fix something or do something for you. And then you have a hard time actually assessing whether that's actually true on the front end. Like you just sort of have to take our word for it. And then we do whatever we said we were going to do. But in the process of doing that, you then are uncertain about the outcome and whether we're actually responsible for the outcome. So like if you hire a mechanic and they fix your car, you're like, great, they fixed the problem with my car, and a week later something else is wrong. You're sort of left to wonder like, okay, did they just mess up fixing my car? Did they break something intentionally so that I'd have to come back and give them more business? Like what happened here? If the surgeon says like, I can do the surgery and fix this thing for you, like I'm sure they can, but sometimes like stuff just goes wrong in medicine. It goes wrong all the time. That's why you have morbidity and mortality stuff in medicine, and why it's such a big field of study. And the same thing happens with financial planners. Like we understand the science of your finances, how to manage risk, how to build optimal portfolios, all of that. But none of that matters if suddenly you get into a bad car wreck and you didn't get enough insurance in place and you're suddenly disabled, lose your income, etc. Or none of that matters if you are saving and investing and you're doing all the right stuff and the market just crashes out. And so it can be hard to look at the results of something like financial planning before you consume it and after you consume it as a service and decide, does the financial planner actually get credit for these outcomes, or was something else in play that really made much more of a difference in how things went? And so that's sort of the interesting problem. Back to the whole example of like the should you put prices and service and so on, is we didn't really find an example that transparency made much of a difference for folks. And what I see in real life, as far as our practice, is most people just come talk to us and they decide they're going to hire us or no one at all. And in the rare cases where somebody says, I am going to do due diligence and I am going to talk to multiple financial planners, a lot of the times, like we're like, hey, that's great. That's a good idea. Here's a bunch of resources to help you do that. And then they don't use them and they come back a week or two later and like, yeah, I was gonna, and then I didn't. So let's just move forward.
Right. Yeah, that is true. Well, okay. So based on the results that you did get from your research, are you going to change anything with the way we do things at this practice, where we advertise how much it costs and everything?
I think that's where, well, and we do, right? If you go on our website, our process is explained. We have a fee calculator available for people to go look at and self-calculate their fee. We have a planning guide that explains in really great depth kind of what our process is, how our prices compare to other service models and data points there. So like we actually give quite a bit of information away as part of our kind of marketing and advertising. But I think this is where I come back to the lack of generalizability and normative recommendations from the study. I don't think the results in my dissertation are strong enough for anybody to look at them and be like, well, Dan wrote it, and if Dan wrote that, we should do that. I think if there's anything I have to take from it that I could give to anybody as, if we take the research at face value, let's say, and we ignore the fact that, again, I've disclaimed like crazy that the generalizability and normativity of it is not very strong. If you took it at face value, I would say the most important thing you could do is decide who your ideal client is and what types of but signals matter to them. So like if you're trying to attract, let's say, engineers, every engineer I know that I've ever worked with is very detail oriented, wants a lot of information, wants to see the assumptions, wants to be able to sort of tinker with it themselves. And if that's the type of person you're trying to attract to a business, financial planning business or otherwise, you should give them a lot of information so they can do that. And that will help them build confidence in you and help them make a selection about or determination about whether you're right for them. But if you're trying to work with, let's say, super busy executives who are used to just making high level decisions and leaving it to somebody else, you probably want to streamline whatever signals you're using, right? And just make it as easy for them to make a decision and say yes as possible so they can save time and move on to their next priority. So I think that's sort of the thing I would take from something like this is for a practice like ours, where we are kind of the local financial planning firm, where we're not really trying to only work with our software engineers or folks at Seagate or over at Google and Boulder or teachers in the school district or retirees. Like, we're not really trying to target anybody in particular. We're just trying to be the best financial planning firm in the area. In that particular context, I think we want to share enough information for people to gather that data if they want it, but also not make it so hard to get in touch with us and schedule a time to meet with us that, ultimately you can sort of skip that stuff if you want, but it's there if you want to go looking for it. I think that's the approach we've taken, and that's probably the approach we'll continue to take in light of, again, my very dubious assessment that we can take any of these results at face value.
Right. If we weren't kind of one of the only or the only fee only firm in Longmont, would you be more of a niche guy and kind of go that route, or would you be a generalist anyway?
Well, I want to put a correction out there. We have some neighbors now. It took 5 years, but we have neighbors. There are now two other practices here in town that are fee only practices, and we're happy to have them here because we literally could not serve the entire city of Longmont, let alone like the surrounding area. So I have no problem with having other fee only practices in the area. I think it's great that they're here. But I think in the context of like, if we were in Denver, almost certainly, yes, we would almost certainly need to do that. Because being in Longmont, being the only practice in Longmont for a long time, and then even still today being sort of the most tenured established practice, because the other two practices in town are essentially like solopreneurs or like kind of out of their house practices. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But by distinction or differentiation, right, we kind of don't have to have that particular like super duper niche focus. But if you were like a financial planner in Manhattan or Denver or Dallas or something, you're going to have to get super specific because you're never going to win like the SEO search thing for like Dallas financial planner or like San Francisco CFP. Like, somebody's winning it and it's not you, right? So in that context, you're going to have to stand out. You're going to have to be like, hey, Miami's number one equity financial planner, or Minneapolis's number one financial planner for teachers or target executives or something like that. And there are a lot of practices that do specialize that way. There's also people who live remotely, where like they kind of live out in the country or just like not in a big community, where they would never be able to get enough clients locally to really fill their roster or their time. And so they have to market or advertise more nationally anyway. And in the same sense that you're never going to win like best CFP in America as like a search term, you are going to have to win for something more specific, right? You're going to be like the best CFP for travel nurses, right? Or the best CFP for United Airlines pilots or something like that. That's winnable at a larger scale. So yeah, if we were in a big urban area, or if we were out in the middle of nowhere, we would probably have more of a niche focus because it would be necessary to do well. But I mean, as it is, right, we have something like anywhere from 2 to 5 consults a week coming in that are just finding us on their own and asking, hey, are you a good fit for me? Can you help me out?
Yeah, that's very true. We're busy enough and your client roster is full. You're set for now.
Yeah, some version thereof, which, by the way, is a weird headspace to get to. When you spend the first 5-6 years being like, anybody who'll work with me is a great client, it's weird to get to a place where you're like, I don't play, like, thank you, I'm flattered, thank you so much, but like, Emily is wonderful, Daniel is wonderful, please work with these wonderful people on my team. I've trained them, I'll support them, you'll definitely get my insight and like knowledge and advice as part of your plan. I just don't have time for more meetings.
You do have the fullest calendar out of anyone I've ever seen in my entire life.
You do a pretty good job of keeping yourself busy. You're busy for different reasons, but you do keep yourself pretty busy.
Well, sure. You only have so many hours in the day and you got to use them all. I'm big on that.
I'll also do the Zen Carl Richards thing here and say, like, isn't the mark of a successful calendar to not have a full calendar? But yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. You know that, but I think I'm a ways from being there.
Someday.
Yes. All right. Well, speaking of the future, what's next for you in your world of research for Dan? What are you going to do with this PhD now that you have it?
I'm first and foremost, I'm going to keep teaching at CU. I didn't need the PhD to teach at CU anyway because this is just I'm going to like a little inside baseball in like the world of academia. Everybody who has a PhD in financial planning is unaffordable for a college unless they want to be affordable. Like every single person with a PhD in financial planning can make so much money in their own private practice or working in industry somewhere, like at a big fund or a big firm, like on a research team or a white paper team or something, like working at a Fidelity or Vanguard, all of us can make like several $100,000 a year minimum. And so, like, no school is going to pay us that to go teach or help launch a program. So that's just something there where, like, I teach, and most faculty in financial planning programs are not PhDs in financial planning because there aren't enough of us, number one. And number two, what we get paid isn't sufficient for it. So we have to do it because we want to support the program or help it get somewhere. So in that context, I'll continue to teach and do all of that. On the research end, I'm mulling over whether I want to do my dissertation over because again, I think there's a lot of issues around sample size and sort of the diversity of the population and so on. I'm tempted to do it again and really try to just get a much bigger sample and a much more representative sample to see how that affects the results and to maybe tinker with the actual mechanisms of the study. But I've also spent 2 years on it, so I'm kind of over it. So I think to some extent, probably when I've made my decision there, it's probably going to be to go ahead and put out the bat signal to research and just say to my colleagues, hey, I finally have some free time. I'd love to help contribute to your research, or here's a couple research ideas I have if you want to sign on. I'm not on a tenure track. I'm not trying to publish or perish or anything like that. But I started my PhD because I had questions about the practice of financial planning and what really the best practices were and what we were assuming that wasn't true. And I still have those questions. And so to that extent, I do want to continue to do research. I just don't need to do it in a purely academic environment anymore, which is nice.
Sure. And I think it would be probably fun for you to collaborate with colleagues. You have quite a few people you enjoy conversing with.
Oh, it's nerd talk 24/7. Like if I sit down with like a Michael Kofikota or a Megan McCoy, Chet Bennett's, and Eric Ludwig, and any of these wonderful people that I'm just name dropping here, and we just start being like, so like, what happens if retirees are financially stressed during a market downturn? That's the whole evening. Like that's going to be all we talk about the whole time, and we're going to start pulling theories off of shelves and talking about models and developing hypotheses. It's absolute nerd fest every time we get together. It's also nice because our world today is so small that we essentially all know each other. So like it's super easy to just be like, oh, like Dr. Todd over here is the expert on this, and oh, Dr. C over here is the expert on that. Dr. Archuleta over there knows everything about this. Like that's one of the fun things in our research space is we all know each other by name effectively, and what we all know and what we're all good at.
Yeah, I'm finding that to be true the more I'm in it. Everywhere I go, everyone knows your name to be certain when I'm at various events and stuff.
I'm a D-minus list celebrity in the world of financial planning.
It's enough that if I name drop and say I work for Dan Yerger, they're like, oh, I know who that is. Great. Perfect. Everywhere I go.
That's probably a blessing or a curse, depending on the context and who you're talking to. But that's
yes, definitely podcast. Both. All right, but it sounds like you're not planning to take it easy now that you've finished and just kick back and relax for a while, or you can take a little break?
I showed you my pile of books. I've got like 12 books here next to me that I want to read. And then when I've read those, I'll think about getting back to something serious. But that's my ambition for the next month is to read something for fun, not out of necessity.
Wow. Well, I have a bunch at my house for you to read for fun. I've got some good books.
Yeah, I'll say you're working through Harry Potter. That's pretty exciting.
I just have to know how everyone else knows the story. I feel behind. I have to read them.
Yeah. For anybody who's not picking up what we're laying down here, Emily has never read Harry Potter. She's working on it.
I'm working on it, though. Yeah, it's one of my low tier tasks, but it's there.
I'm just going to steadily ratchet up on your quarterly goals. Like, have you finished the Goblet of Fire yet? You need to finish that by the end of this quarter. We got to talk about it.
I finished the first 3 that you gave me. I'm working on it, but now I'm getting to the long ones. They're more of a commitment.
Goblet of Fire is a lot to chew on, but it's a good one.
Well, I'll alternate between that and the other authors I'm into right now.
Cormac McCarthy. Who else?
Ray Bradbury. I'm alternating between them right now.
Fahrenheit 451. I think Bradbury is still alive too. So like you could always like send him an email and be like, "Hey, here's what I thought about your stuff," and he'd be like, "Thanks for the 1 trillionth email I've gotten about this."
Yeah, that's true. I'll add that to my calendar for my time blocking. Email
There
Ray
you go.
Bradbury.
There you go. Fun times. All right. Well, you've picked on my PhD here enough, so I'm gonna do what I do every week, and I'm gonna pick on you for a second. So, what have you learned that's beneficial for everybody else to know about here in the last couple of weeks?
Oh man. Um, this was supposed to be an interview of you, Dan. What have I learned? I have learned that you don't always accomplish things the way you thought you were going to when you were going to. I am very, very much so. I'm a linear thinker. I like a plan. I've got trips planned for the rest of the year. I've got the books I'm going to read for the next few months in a row on the shelf in my living room. I like a plan. I'm in the right profession in that regard. But I am beholden then to people signing and different types of people signing and different kinds of plans that need to be built and start dates for school and when I'm allowed to do that based on things that are out of my control. And I despise that aspect of the world. I want to do things the way I want to do them, when I want to do them. So having to be a little bit flexible around what I do first, second, whatever, and being able to pivot, like, hey, this was going to be a priority for the next week or the next month. I can't do it. So I need to refocus on something else. And being smooth about it and still being efficient is kind of what I've been learning.
Yeah.
You're squinting.
No, I mean, my thought here is sort of the classic. I think it's Patton. It could have been somebody else, but it's the classic: the plan never survives contact with reality sort of statement. But I think you're also still hinting like there's nothing wrong with being structured and having a plan and having a way you want to do things. You just have to acknowledge that it may not go that way and be flexible enough to accommodate it when it happens. But there's nothing wrong with having a plan because that's in that domain of things that you can control, and things that matter depending on your objectives.
Yeah. Yep. That is what I'm working on as you are working on your PhD, which formal congratulations on finishing that. I don't think we said that so far today.
Well, thank you. 3 days on, we're now getting to the formal congratulations of Wednesday.
Yes. We had the informal congratulations day off. Thank you very much.
This is true. That was pretty formal. You gave me a card and everything.
Well, sure. You only get one PhD, or so I thought.
You can get more than one, but you're kind of missing the point if you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if anyone did too, it would be you. You're so thorough.
Ugh, never again. It was good, but never again.
You're done? All right.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.